Chatty Chappies are the recent friends Andy and Brian who are discovering similar interests, and just like chatting about all kinds of things from music to vehicles, spirituality to writing, but seldom football. If you want to be added to their future communications, there will be a notice at the end of this broadcast. Chatty Chappies.
Well, Andy, here we are again. I am so sorry.
Back in the book room.
Back in the book room. The library, no less.
Aye.
I am so sorry. We ran out of time the last time, and I cut you off. And it wasn't a mechanism to get others to come back and listen to us. You were in Romans, and we mentioned the Apocrypha and the relationship between the Bible and art. And I think you were starting to talk about how we appreciate paintings.
Yes, aye, Brian. Renaissance artists, you go around the great art galleries of not just this country but across Europe, America, you're going to come across paintings on a biblical theme. Which you and I would possibly recognise the stories. But there are some that are painted based on passages from the Apocrypha.
Okay.
So you need a knowledge of the Apocrypha if you were going to make a academic study or even an appreciation of Renaissance art.
Right.
I'm not sure what your own. What are you, a art appreciator? Are you?
Probably not to that extent. I like a good painting. I've been involved in selling art, various types. So I've got a measure of it, but I'm certainly no expert by any means. And there are some pieces that would catch my attention, and there's others I would say don't see the point of this.
You see, I look at art and paintings in the same way as, and I have the same question to artists that I know as I do to writers that I know. So if you're a writer, an author, how do you know when you've written enough? How do you know when a chapter is complete, that you've got everything in that you want and you haven't put in superfluous words? Same way with a painting. You hear daubing paint on a canvas, or how do you know you've done enough? It's finished.
Now that's interesting, because I think artists and writers, both in fact, would find it difficult to stop. In fact, aren't they always doing a bit more and a bit more and a bit more? So maybe that's a tough one. And I know that people rewrite books and rewrite paragraphs, which helps it to mature, I suppose, but is it ever finished?
I don't know. You're more of a writer than I am. I just dabble in scribbling a few thoughts down. You've got published works.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing here, because I started a book way back in 2012 about the history of the church in Scotland, and in the last 3 or 4 years there's been so much change happening, not just with COVID, that I felt that I couldn't really get to the stage of publishing it, and I've actually gone back and rewritten some of it. So maybe there is a measure of a need to revisit stuff and to to rewrite from a new point of view, perhaps. And in fact, part of this book mentions, yes, the Haldane brothers.
All right, okay,
Yeah.
our dear friends,
Yeah, because
Robert and James Alexander.
yes, because Robert and James Haldane were in Perth, and I was writing for one of my books in the past about the Perth Baptist Church, and in there I mentioned the Haldanes because, well, I'll come back to what they did, which does sound a bit strange, and in fact we might have mentioned it in our last programme, I can't remember. Anyway, I promised I'd go back and do some research for you, and that was helpful because I've used some of that research in this book I just mentioned. So maybe I will publish it, and it's now got a few more pages because of the Haldane brothers. So, in terms of research, yeah, you're right, there's a Robert and James. Robert and James are brothers. They're about 4 or 5 years difference in age. Robert's the older one. And you mentioned him going to Geneva last time we
yes,
spoke,
aye.
and that is correct. And so he was more the lecturer, James was more the preacher.
Yes.
So, the last time we spoke, there was this, were they from Stirling or were they from Gleneagles? Well, I've got the answer to that. Robert and James's parents were both from Gleneagles. So both families came from Gleneagles, and that's where the family roots are. Robert bought Airthry Castle near Stirling.
And what had he done to be able to, where did the money come from?
I think that's been in the family.
Right.
Now, Robert's father was a Navy officer, and Robert did a bit of...
A Royal Navy officer?
Yeah.
Royal Navy, not Merchant Navy.
Royal Navy officer. And Robert was in the Navy for some time. And they seem to have moved around the country because Robert was born in London in 1764.
Okay.
And James was born in Dundee in 1768. Now, Robert went to university in Edinburgh, so that's after the Navy, and then he seems to be working in the estate in Gleneagles. So maybe there was enough money for him to buy the castle at some point. And at that point, he was quite vocal in politics. He had his particular views and seemed to have perhaps annoyed quite a few people with his politics.
Because this was post-Jacobite rebellion. 1760s.
Yes, so
yes.
yes.
1745-46 was the last Jacobite rising.
So that could have
So,
impact in his politics, yep, that could have.
what was his politics?
Right. Not sure exactly about that, but if we come back to it in a minute or two, whatever his politics were, I don't think it was treated very well by some missionary societies. So what happened was the two guys in their 20s at different times have a religious experience, a conversion, and after that they seem to have been far more fired up for mission.
Okay.
And this is round about the time when there is perhaps a whole spiritual awakening in the country across the UK. So what happens is that they are operating in independent churches, and they're working in these independent churches. They call them tabernacles, but whatever they're called doesn't matter. It's a bit like a congregational church, so their authority is within the individual church, and they're not accountable to another denomination.
Right. So would there have been a number of what we might call evangelical churches, independent evangelical churches and groups in Scotland and across the United Kingdom at that time?
Yes, there definitely were. There was various types, and James and Robert seem to be encouraging more of these new churches. They would build buildings and establish churches, and then move on to another place and build another church, and so on. And quite a big work, in fact. Perth comes to mind, Elgin, I think, Dundee.
Elgin.
I think so, yeah. Yeah. So apart,
My mother's family
okay,
are Forres, Elgin, Murrayshire people.
yeah,
So you mentioned Elgin and the Haldanes being in Elgin. That sends little bells ringing.
yeah. So what happens is they ask to become members and missionaries of the Bengal mission, and they want to go out to India. So they're obviously fired up. They want to preach their gospel. They want to get out there, but unfortunately, they're not accepted by the mission, and it may well be because of Robert's politics. It's not 100% sure, but it's not good. So we're now at just about the turn of the century, 1799-ish, and James starts working and preaching in Scotland in the mission field. Both brothers help to set up a special society that's going to do mission in Scotland, and off he goes from Aberfeldy, not far from the Perth base. Off they go to do mission work, and he goes as far as Shetland. And in 1799, in the summertime, he's up in Dunrossness in the Shetlands. So they're getting across the country. So they've been in Thurso, they've been in Inverness, they've been in Elgin, they've been in a lot of places, and they're projecting and trying to establish new churches based on this evangelical independent church. They're obviously non-denominational. They want to work with anybody who has the same like-minded evangelical feel. And they're also doing this and supporting Gaelic-speaking missionaries.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't think of that, do we?
No.
We tend to think of that perhaps more as a free church thing or an island thing. But of course, there was a lot more Gaelic speaking in Scotland than we think.
Yes, because I think we're looking at Gaelic now as being the national language of Scotland. We've got, but was there a time when Gaelic was ever the language spoken in the Lowlands? You're a Lowland man yourself.
That's a good question. I think we need to ask somebody else about that. But my understanding is that Scotland has never been the one language.
No.
There's been Pictish, there's been Gaelic, there's been Scots,
Yeah.
and of course as you go further across to the east, we have even dialects as well, and the Doric. So we can never say that Gaelic was spoken across Scotland, but it was spoken in the borders.
Right.
So it is in different places. But going back to the boys, Robert and James, interesting that they seem to be, as well as wanting to involve many people from different denominations, they're looking to establish these churches, as I mentioned. But they're rubbing shoulders with famous people. Henry Drummond, a spiritual man who's looking for the spiritual awakening and the work of the Holy Spirit. They're rubbing shoulders with John Newton, Amazing Grace.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
William Carey of the Baptist Missionary Society.
Yeah.
So they are engaging with not just Scottish people but UK people as well. And because of their vision, they wanted to support the distribution of Bibles. Now at that point, there is no Scottish Bible Society. There is one Bible Society of a reasonable size organisation called the British and Foreign Bible Society. And the Haldanes were big supporters financially of this organisation. And in these days, that organisation had what would you call it, committees or sub-chapters, and there was one in Edinburgh where the boys would go and visit and engage with people. So there was a subcommittee in Scotland, and by 1820, we find that Robert has got really frustrated with the Bible Society, or British and Foreign Bible Society.
Just want to touch on something there. You've got them, Robert, in Geneva. When was he in Geneva?
Right, that's a good point. Right, so if Robert's frustrated in 1820, he's obviously been out to Geneva before then, and I'll explain why. He goes out to Geneva because he's wanting to meet two specific people who he thinks can help in the expansion of Protestant religion.
Because he had been in France as well.
Exactly, and that's where he comes to blows with the Bible Society. In France, he discovers that the distribution of Bibles have the Apocrypha in it.
Right.
And
okay.
they've been distributed by the Bible Society, or the British and Foreign Bible Society, which is now called the Bible Society of England and Wales.
The reason I was asking about the Geneva thing, we've got the turn of the century time, 1790s,
yes,
early
into 1800s. Yeah.
Now that was also the time of the Napoleonic Wars across Europe, all the way to Moscow, in back. The retreat from Moscow, the whole of Europe was in a turmoil.
Yeah.
How did he get on going to France in that?
That's an interesting point. What I gather is that he went to progress the gospel.
Yes.
He knows that the countries France, Spain, Portugal are Roman Catholic.
Yes.
And he wants to break into this. He wants to present what religious experience he's had to these people. And of course, as I say, when he comes across people, he discovers that these Bibles have been distributed with the Apocrypha. We're really running out of time here. And we've got
another episode coming up. We can feel it coming on.
We can definitely feel it coming on.
Yeah.
So I think, can I just stop us there?
Yep.
You were listening to Brian and Andy of Chatty Chappies. It's now easier for people to find our page Chatty Chappies in Facebook search. Come and join them again soon. If you want to know when to hear them next, send a private message with your email details to the Facebook page Chatty Chappies for further instructions. The song Uncertainty by Broxton Knox is available on Spotify.